The whole Federation knows that the Chief Commander Kevin, who is half dead all day long, has a troublesome young wife at home. But what they didn't expect was that this young wife was actually an interstellar admiral with outstanding military achievements. 01. Really not, let me explain. Listening to the noise in the office, passers-by knew that the famous Kevin was being checked on by his wife again. Since I became a commander at the age of 22, I have commanded countless battles, large and small, in the past 6 years, and won them all perfectly. Everyone was impressed by me except my partner Jason. Every time we met, Jason would walk past me with a sullen face and bump my shoulder hard as if he was angry. I looked at the hung-up phone in my hand and sighed helplessly. I don't know how to make this young master happy this time. The Federation is now in the midst of internal and external troubles. Since the rebellion of the Armored Corps Technician Division, the Federation has undergone a major reshuffle. Externally, the Hollow Bandits are rampant and constantly invade the surrounding planets. Every day I look at the documents on my desk with a stable mood, revealing a half-dead beauty. After reviewing the documents on my desk that required urgent approval, I packed up my things and got off work on time, which was a rare occasion. As soon as I opened the door and stood at the door to change my shoes, I heard a sarcastic voice next to my ear. "Hey, look, who is this? It's our Kevin." It turns out that Kevin, who is well known and loved by everyone in the league, is back. I changed my shoes and placed them neatly in the shoe cabinet, then stood up and looked helplessly at Jason, who was leaning against the wall and looking at me with a pout. "I told you that we're just colleagues. Don't be angry." After changing my clothes, I walked to the dining table, looked at the prepared food, pursed my lips, and turned to ask Jason, "You haven't eaten yet? Kevin hasn't come home yet. How can I dare to eat?" Jason stood at the door without moving, just looking at me sadly. "Okay, stop being jealous. I was wrong. I will keep my distance from them next time." I really had no way to deal with Jason. I could only know that I had to give in to this young master. Otherwise, I would not be able to live in peace for the next few days. Who is jealous? Don't be so self-indulgent. Yes, I'm just being sentimental. Come over and have dinner." Jason walked to the dining table reluctantly and wanted to say something, but I choked him back with a sentence. "Don't talk while eating or sleeping." Ding dong, ding dong. After dinner, I was cleaning up the dishes and chatting with Jason, who was leaning against the kitchen door, when suddenly the doorbell rang. "Go open the door." I put the plate in my hand on the shelf, and the water droplets slid down my hand. Jason muttered, "You just know how to order me around," and obediently walked to the door and opened it. "Is this Jason? Please sign for your flowers and gifts." Jason was holding a bunch of roses in his arms and holding 2 exquisite gift bags. After signing for them with difficulty, he closed the door clumsily with his legs. I packed up and came out, looking at Jason leisurely, and Jason suddenly felt like a fool. "Do you like it?" I looked calm and composed on the surface, but my hands behind my back were actually clasping my fingers nervously. I thought he shouldn't hate the smell of his own pheromones. Jason reacted for a while, then looked at me with eyes wide open in shock. "You gave it to me?" I nodded, reluctantly refusing to look at him. "Today I got too close to that Omega colleague. I'm sorry. Put me down." Before I could finish my words, Jason picked me up horizontally. Looking at the flowers thrown on the sofa, I suddenly felt that I should not have bought flowers. It was a bit of a waste. "Since you apologized so sincerely, I forgive you." I was carried into the bedroom, feeling Jason smelling his pheromones on the back of my neck. The smell should be very light now. Jason was dissatisfied and wanted to inject more of his pheromones, but I covered his mouth as he was about to let go. I blushed, feeling the heat in my palms, lowered my head and whispered, "Inside the gift bag is your favorite strawberry flavor." 02. The next morning, Jason looked at the person still sleeping in his arms and rubbed his degenerated gland contentedly. I was emitting the scent of Jason's pheromones from the inside out, but he still left a strawberry on the back of his neck that was already bitten and swollen. My eyes are swollen from crying last night, and I am sleeping soundly now. Jason quietly got up, washed up, went to the kitchen and quickly prepared breakfast. Everyone in the room was still asleep. Jason used my phone to ask for leave and looked at another gift bag that he had thrown on the sofa yesterday. Given Kevin's personality, I don't think I can give him a gift that would surprise him. A belt? A watch? Or a pen? Jason opened the package with this in mind, and looking at the square box in his hand, he suddenly felt a little nervous. At the beginning, Jason and I didn't get married because of love. It was only because his family forced the marriage that I accepted Jason. Because it was a secret family marriage, they had no wedding and no rings. The two families just sat together for a meal, got the marriage certificate, and then the two got together. Jason held the box nervously. He always felt that Kevin didn't like him that much and was only with him out of necessity. The more he expected, the more afraid his hopes would be dashed. Jason opened the box carefully, closing his eyes and not daring to look. Suddenly my hand was lifted up, and something cool passed through my ring finger. Jason looked at the person kneeling in front of him, clumsily wearing the ring, his earlobes red as if they were about to bleed. "Why are you awake?" "I have to go to work." My waist was still hurting, and I looked at Jason with some helplessness. He knew he had to go to work, but he was still so unrestrained. Looking at the simple ornaments on Jason's slender fingers, I raised my head and asked, "Ring, do you like it?" "It's just SOSO." Jason snorted, speaking in a proud tone, but his hands honestly pulled me into his arms and carefully put another ring on my finger. The atmosphere between the two of us was just getting romantic. Jason closed his eyes, pursed his lips and moved closer to me, but he heard my lifeless voice. "That's good. Put me down. I have to go to work." Jason's body froze, his arms felt light. He opened his eyes and looked at me with a forced smile as I was about to wash up, veins bulging on his forehead. "I've asked for leave for you." While I was brushing my teeth, I saw a man with a gloomy face blocking the bathroom door. I felt depressed and wondered what I had done to make him angry again. I lowered my head, spit out the foam in my mouth, rinsed my mouth and said indistinctly, "Why do you want to ask for leave?" "I'll be there soon." Ah, I had just finished rinsing my mouth and I screamed, and was pushed onto the sink. I think Kevin is in good health. If he's taking sick leave, he must be really sick and unable to get out of bed. Afterwards, I was groggy and racked my brains to understand why Jason suddenly went crazy. After being sent to work, I sat in the office, rubbing my waist and looking at the answer to the question, how to comfort my angry wife, on my phone, and I clicked hard. 03. In fact, there is a reason why Jason is so worried about himself. On the one hand, their marriage was a family alliance, and on the other hand, there was an unpleasant past between him and Jason. During those school days when we would blush whenever we looked at each other, Jason imprisoned me for a whole year. Jason has heard the name Kevin over and over again from adults since he was a child. Kevin is one of the Federation's outstanding student representatives of the year. Kevin also won the Federation Gold Medal. Kevin followed the commando team to complete each mission perfectly at a young age. Jason, at the age when dogs are tired of people, met the child that adults talked about as another child. When he saw the brother who smiled brightly and cheerfully and touched his head gently, Jason fell in love at first sight. With candy in his mouth and sticky hands, he asked his brother to hug him. From then on, I was followed like a little follower until Jason changed from a throwing tantrum kid who wanted his brother to hold him to a spirited young man in his middle school years. I helplessly looked at Jason, who is 2 years younger than me. I didn't understand why the cute little boy in my childhood became more and more distant from me now. Whenever I greeted him, he would ignore me and sometimes even ignore me. But the increasingly busy courses left me no time to distract myself. I was about to have my 18-year-old coming-of-age ceremony, and the internal preliminaries for the federal major general would be held shortly after the differentiation. So when Jason expressed his feelings, I was so busy that I just thought it was a child's joke and rejected it sternly. Jason looked at my decisive refusal and clenched his fingers into his palms. My teachers, family members, and friends in my circle all firmly believed that I would differentiate into an alpha above grade A. Jason, who was considered to have the potential to differentiate into an alpha, also thought so. However, the reality was so unexpected. On my 18th birthday, the sky was gloomy, dark clouds gathered, and the wind blew on my face as I held the diagnosis. I gritted my teeth and looked at the diagnosis of undifferentiated features in my hand, unable to speak. This diagnosis was like a verdict on his life, sentencing him to be an ordinary beta with no physical advantage. Without the diagnosis of differentiation into alpha, I could not participate in the internal preliminaries. Everyone was disappointed and comforted themselves that there were other ways to go. But I knew they were secretly saying that they would never get ahead in their lives. What's the point of being excellent in childhood? If he is not alpha, he will be nothing in his future work. I knew what they said about me behind my back, but I didn't care. I never gave up on getting into the Union Academy. There was no internal preliminaries, and there was a public election every 5 years. There were still 3 years left, and I insisted on military training during this period, without slacking off for a single day. But he did not give up, and Kevin's family fell into decline first. Due to the lack of outstanding heirs and achievements for many years, Kevin's once glorious family was squeezed out by other families, and the family business suffered a heavy blow, and the family business was shattered. Looking at my father's haggard figure and my mother's white hair, I felt pain in my heart and anxiety, and kept hoping that the public election would be held as soon as possible. But just 3 months before the public election, Jason, who had disappeared from my world for 3 years, suddenly appeared. Jason stood in front of me, his hands on my sides, his tall body wrapped around himself, silently pressing me down. "Brother, I have differentiated into an alpha. Can you stay with me?" "Jason, stop joking. My brother is busy. Let me go." I instinctively felt that Jason was very dangerous, and my heart was telling me to leave as soon as possible. "This is very annoying, brother. Do you want to go with me by yourself? Or do you want me to carry you?" "Jason, I'm not kidding you." I looked at Jason's ambiguous smile, slapped his arm away, and struggled out of his arms. Just as I was about to leave, my wrist was grabbed tightly. After differentiating into an alpha, I indeed had a natural advantage. I felt the force coming from my wrist and I couldn't break free at all. Without further ado, I raised my leg and kicked Jason sideways. Jason ducked his head back, and I took the opportunity to pull my hand away. After I was freed, I ran without hesitation, but after a few steps I fell to my knees, gasping for breath. I looked at Jason, who was walking towards me leisurely with red eyes. I didn't expect him to release pheromones to suppress me. I shouted at him angrily with all my strength. "Jason, I'll really be mad if you keep doing this." "It's okay, brother. You'll be mine soon anyway." Jason held me sideways and I felt his kiss on my forehead, and then he carried me into his car. Why didn't he pursue Kevin properly in the beginning? Jason kept asking himself later. Maybe it was because he had never been rejected since he was a child, or maybe it was because he was blinded by the love novels he read at that time. 04. When I woke up again, I touched my dizzy head, got up from the bed and wanted to find Jason, but I was shocked to find that I was chained to the bed. I stared blankly at the sturdy chain, then raised my head to look at the endless blue sea outside the floor-to-ceiling window, unwilling to believe that Jason could do such a thing. "Brother, you're awake." Jason came in with porridge in his hand, looked at the person sitting on the bed looking outside in a daze, walked over to sit next to me, picked up the spoon and was about to feed himself. "What do you want?" I turned around and met Jason's eyes, wondering what tricks this willful guy was playing. "If you want a brother, you are already mine." Jason smiled with narrowed eyes, looking at the man who frowned beautifully. "Don't be so willful. I don't have any thoughts about you in that regard. Stop playing these childish games." I pointed to the chain around my ankle and said, "Take this off." "Ah, this is too annoying, brother. Let's eat first." Jason scooped up a spoonful of porridge and fed it to my mouth. I was immediately annoyed by his stubborn attitude, so I raised my hand to slap the spoon away and said firmly, "Jason, let me go before I get really angry." The spoon fell on the carpet, and the white porridge stained the soft carpet. Jason looked at the porridge spilled on the ground and said with regret, "What a pity. This is the porridge I spent a lot of time cooking. I looked at him like this, feeling so angry that I had nowhere to vent my anger. I felt so suffocated in my chest. Are you listening to me? Jason put the porridge on the bedside table, then took out a pair of handcuffs from the bedside. I struggled hard, but he pressed me down on the bed without giving me a chance to refuse. He turned me over easily, and my hands were clamped and handcuffed behind my back. You're crazy. Jason, let me go. I didn't expect that he was so strong now. I tried to kick Jason away with my legs, but he sat on my legs all of a sudden, and I was completely pinned down on the quilt. Brother, if you keep struggling, I will tie you up completely. Feeling Jason's hands wandering on my body, I froze, trembling as I stared at him from the side. But in Jason's eyes, Kevin's vicious look was like a kitten throwing a tantrum. So cute. Seeing that I had calmed down, Jason helped me sit up, tested the temperature of the porridge and found it was just right, then pinched my chin with one hand and put the bowl against my lips with the other hand. I stared at him as he wolfed down the porridge mouthful by mouthful. The bowl was empty. Jason took out a piece of paper and gently wiped the corner of my mouth. From his perspective, I could only see that the corners of my brother's eyes were red, and he was staring at him as if he had been wronged. Jason was actually excited by this look. He lifted my face and kissed me without giving me a chance to refuse. My eyes widened and I struggled violently with my restrained body, but I couldn't move the arms that were wrapped around my body even a little bit. The wet, warm, and soft touch on his mouth made Jason lose some of his rationality. He didn't even notice that I was lacking oxygen due to not being able to breathe, and a few unconscious hums escaped from my throat. It wasn't until my face flushed and I fell weakly into Jason's arms that his mind was awakened. Jason hugged me contentedly, looked at my wrists that were rubbed red from the struggle, and untied the handcuffs with heartache. But I didn't expect that the person who was leaning on my arms and breathing heavily in the last second would punch me hard in the abdomen in the next second. Jason grimaced in pain and bent down instantly, loosening his arms that were holding me. Before he could react, I punched Jason on the head again, making him see stars and fall on the bed with a throbbing headache. Taking advantage of this opportunity, I rolled out of bed with my legs limp, trying to regulate my breathing while frantically searching for the key to the anklet in the bedside table. No, why not? I searched through the few things left in the bedside table, even a few small plastic bags, but I couldn't find the key. The next second, I heard the sound of metal collision. I turned my head to look at the key in front of me and reached out to grab it, but the owner of the key took it back. Jason stood behind me, covering his broken eyebrow, blood flowing down his fingers. A bit of violent desire was aroused in his heart, and he spoke in a cold voice. Brother, are you looking for this? I stopped talking nonsense and kicked him with my leg, but he easily dodged it by stepping backwards. I stood up suddenly and grabbed Jason, grabbed his shoulders and turned around quickly, trying to throw him over my shoulder. But I didn't expect Jason to just grab his waist and wrap his legs around my thighs. We both lost our balance and fell on the bed. I turned over and wanted to continue fighting, but was finally suppressed by the pheromones released by Jason. Brother, you are so cruel. Jason took a tissue to wipe the blood off his face, lifted up his clothes and looked at his belly, which was swollen and purple from being beaten. The pain was so severe that it pierced his heart. Jason looked at the person lying on the bed, helpless at his mercy, and turned over and pressed on him, pressing his sharp fangs against my already shriveled glands. No, don't. Although the glands have degenerated, the back of the neck is still a very sensitive and fragile area. So when a large amount of pheromones poured in, I instantly lost all my strength, trembling all over, cold sweat on my forehead, and dizziness. Jason looked at the teeth marks on the back of his neck with satisfaction, and the pheromones that had just been injected were rushing out. The whole house was filled with the scent of roses, but I couldn't smell it, and I didn't have time to think about what Jason's pheromones smelled like. The plastic bag finally came in handy, and every time I tried to escape, Jason would grab the chain and pull me back. I was dazed, and even when I passed out, I still had no idea why I had ended up in this situation. 05. When I woke up again, I was lying in bed unable to move, and I needed Jason's help to eat and drink. My mind was in a mess. I looked at Jason, who looked very satisfied, and asked hoarsely, "Jason, you said you like me?" "Of course, brother. I wish I could be with you all the time." Jason smiled happily like a child, revealing a row of white teeth between his swollen lips. I sat up with difficulty under Jason's support, lowered my eyes, and shook my head. "No, it shouldn't be like this. If you really like someone, you shouldn't do this." "So what do you want me to do, brother?" Jason lay on my legs, hugged my waist, which trembled when touched, and looked at my face seriously. "I don't know, but I don't like you. You shouldn't force me to do something I don't like." When Jason heard those 5 words, his face fell and he lifted my face, his eyes full of obstinacy and stubbornness. "Then do the things you don't like until you like them." "You!" I couldn't communicate with him, so I turned my face away and didn't want to look at him. I thought about the current situation. I have to be present at the public election in 3 months. If I am locked in this house by him forever, I will be really desperate. Hesitantly, I looked at Jason. Since the hard way didn't work, I could only try the soft way. I didn't have the extra thoughts to think about why Jason liked me, nor did I feel wronged for being treated like this. No one taught me what love was since I was a child. In my world, there was only the law of the jungle and survival of the fittest. "Jason, I'm hungry." I reached out and touched Jason's soft hair. He was obviously a kid, not even 20 years old, but he kept saying that he liked me. Jason's eyes lit up when he heard him address him. "Brother, what did you call me?" "Say it again, I will take you to eat." My face suddenly turned red. This was a nickname I had been calling since I was a child, but I felt a little embarrassed when someone deliberately mentioned it like this. Finally, Jason heard the affectionate nickname as he wished. He untied the thin chain on my ankle and went to the kitchen to cook a table of dishes under my instructions, albeit a little awkwardly. After a while, I didn't accept Jason's confession, but I didn't reject his approach. This action made Jason feel that as long as he worked hard, I would fall in love with him one day. Since I didn't mention leaving, Jason gradually relaxed his guard. He liked to go shopping in the supermarket with me when the sun was setting, and he also liked to stroll along the seaside on moonlit nights. In fact, Jason stopped wearing the anklet the day after I didn't refuse his approach. Jason thought, "He is someone I like, not a pet I keep in captivity. As long as he is willing to stay by my side, that's enough." But one day, 3 months later, when Jason returned home from military training and opened the door, he did not see a familiar figure sitting in the living room waiting for him. Jason took out his cell phone and pressed the call button, but no one answered. I still ran away. 06. I clenched the phone in my hand, sat in the taxi, and simply blocked Jason's number. The federal election is tomorrow, so I took a taxi home and saw my parents, whom I hadn't seen for a long time. The day before he escaped, Jason was still forcefully injecting pheromones into his dried-up glands. Because he was a beta, every day after training, when Jason came home and smelled the faded rose scent on me, his defenses would break down, and he would stubbornly repeat the injection of pheromones. "Kevin, why are you back?" Kevin's mother looked at her son, who suddenly came back in shock, and looked behind her but saw no one following him. "Mom, what's wrong? I haven't been home for a long time. Don't you welcome me?" I looked at my mother in confusion, who seemed to be hesitant to say something, and then I saw my father walking out with a serious face, a suppression patch in his hand. "Put it on. The smell of your pheromones is so strong that it's like filling the whole house with roses." I took it with both hands and carefully placed it against the back of my neck, which was covered with bite marks. "Where's Jason? Didn't he come with you?" I listened to my father's question and my hands froze. Why should I come back with him? No answer was given. After putting up the suppression sticker, I walked to the room and looked for the documents that supported the degree information. As I searched, I asked, "Mom, where are my degree certificate and household registration certificate?" "Kevin, what do you want these documents for?" I searched everywhere where I usually keep my ID, but still couldn't find it. Looking at my mother leaning against the door with a stiff smile on her face, I felt more and more strange. "Take part in the public election. It's tomorrow." I haven't slacked off for a moment in the past 3 years. I'm sure I can pass it. I walked over to my mother. I thought my parents must have been exhausted during this period. I put my arms around her, took a deep breath, and said confidently, "Don't worry, Mother. I will definitely be selected and become an admiral soon. I will revive our family and save you from having to work so hard." Kevin's mother was stiff all over. She wanted to hug her son, whom she hadn't seen for a long time, but she didn't have the courage to reach out. Kevin's father was watching from the sidelines. Not wanting to put his wife in such an embarrassing situation, he told me directly and clearly, "You don't have to participate in the public election. We have canceled your registration." My father's words stunned me. I let go of my mother and ignored her as she reached out to grab the corner of my clothes. I looked at my father in disbelief. "Father, stop joking. The selection will start tomorrow." I couldn't laugh because my father never joked with him. I tried to walk out while talking, but my mother grabbed me by the corner of my clothes. "It's okay if you don't have those documents. An ID is enough." "I'm not kidding you. You're not on the list for tomorrow's audition." My father handed me the list of candidates for the selection. I took it with trembling hands and turned the pages. There was no. I didn't see my name until I turned to the last page. With a trembling voice, I looked at my respected father and asked with all my strength, "Why?" "Jason will come to pick you up in a while. Just follow him obediently." It was the first time that Kevin's father saw such a fragile and broken expression on the face of his son, who had grown up to be outstanding and proud, and he felt mixed emotions. "Jason? What?" There was confusion in my eyes. "What does this have to do with Jason?" "Kevin, listen to what Mom says." The mother's eyes were filled with tears. She walked up to me and stretched out her well-maintained hand to touch her stunned son. "Mom, that's been my dream since I was little. Even if I differentiate into a beta, I still have hope of joining the Army. Besides, my family's business and company will get better if I join the Army." Why? Kevin's mother looked at her son, who was speaking incoherently and choking with sobs, and tears fell uncontrollably. She wanted to comfort her son, but was in no position to do so. Just then, the doorbell rang. 07. The father walked to the door and opened it. Jason was standing outside with a gloomy face. However, he still pretended to be well-behaved when he saw Kevin's father. He called him Uncle sensibly. He walked into the house and looked at Kevin, who was crying his heart off. It felt like something stabbed his heart, and a trace of uneasiness and heartache flowed out. "Auntie, I'm here to pick up my brother." Kevin's mother looked at Jason standing at the door, turned her back and wiped the tears from her face, forcing herself to look respectable. "Jason, can you please let Annie talk to Kevin again?" Jason looked at her coldly, not understanding why she was pretending to be so affectionate with him. Kevin's mother looked at his cold and rejecting expression and realized that her son had secretly run out and made him angry. She reluctantly let go of his hand and finally hugged him tightly, her voice choking with sobs. "Kevin, Mom loves you. When you get there, you must listen to Jason's words." My eyes were blurry. Looking at my sad mother and my father, who didn't want to look at me, I suddenly felt that they were so strange. Why should I go with him? I looked at my mother, who covered her eyes and turned sideways, grabbed her arm and questioned her. "Don't you understand? Your parents have already sold you to my family. They sold you to me for the company." Jason walked over and grabbed his arm, pulling him into his arms. He didn't want to see me like this anymore, an appearance that was about to break. He knew it was unfair to me, but since no one told him, he had to be the bad guy and tell the naive me the cruel truth. I looked at Jason, who had a look of annoyance, with a strange look on my face. Then I looked at my parents, who were frozen in place. Suddenly, I understood, and suddenly, I gave up. "Father, have all the problems at home been resolved?" I leaned in Jason's arms, my scattered hair covering my eyes, making it difficult for my father to see my expression. "Solved." Hearing my father's answer, I nodded. "That's good." I gave up all my struggles and reluctance, and let Jason pick me up and walk out of the home where I had lived for 21 years. Kevin's mother covered her mouth and stretched out her hand to chase him out, but Kevin's father hugged her and comforted her. She cried bitterly while leaning on the chest that had given her strength and security all her life. I was numbly brought into the car by Jason and thrown onto the passenger seat. I closed my eyes and leaned against the headrest as I watched the man handcuffing me in silence. That night, even though I was tortured to the point of unconsciousness, I didn't say a word. The next morning, Jason forced me to get up while I was still asleep, to wash and eat something. Looking at the real-time locator on my foot, I didn't resist and obediently let Jason pull me into the car. The scenery outside the car window passed by in a flash, hurriedly unable to stop, just like my life. My silence was broken until the car stopped. Looking at the public election scene outside the window, I stretched out my hand and leaned on the glass eagerly, watching the young people running freely in the selection venue under the scorching sun. The next second, a shadow covered me, and Jason leaned behind me and pressed my hand against the glass. Then he opened his mouth and bit my already swollen and bleeding neck. "No!" I shouted hoarsely after not speaking for a long time, and struggled violently, like a trapped beast's last fight and resistance. "Why? You want to go?" Jason leaned against my neck. His face felt comfortable, but his words were as vicious as winter ice. "As long as you can get out of this car, I'll let you join." I looked out the window, feeling dizzy. I had only eaten some porridge in the morning from yesterday to today, and I had been tossed around all night, so I had no strength left in my body, but I still pushed Jason away and reached out to twist the door handle. Jason looked at Kevin, who was trying hard to escape from him, with a gloomy face. If he didn't run away, he could find him a half-time job in the military camp in the future. But as long as he ran away, he would have to stay with him. I still stubbornly twisted the handle, and even after discovering that the door was locked, I struggled to crawl out from Jason's shackles and to the back seat of the car. Suddenly my feet were grabbed and I fell onto the back seat. Jason pulled me up and put my hands on the glass. He pressed my head against the window with one hand and unbuttoned my clothes with the other hand. "Jason, no. Please. Not here." I looked at the people outside the car who were free and smiling brightly, and struggled desperately. "Don't be here." The light in my eyes dimmed little by little as Jason moved, and my hands fell limply. Some people welcome a new life in freedom, while others die on a sunny day. 08. Jason was content to get a quiet and obedient Kevin who would just stay at home and wait for him to come back. He held the moon that he had coveted as a child in his own hands. Every time after training, Kevin would lie on the bed in a daze, as if the posture was exactly the same as when he left in the morning. He held the man in his arms and left his mark on the back of his neck over and over again. At first, Jason was very satisfied with this kind of relationship. Kevin didn't cry or make a fuss, but cooperated with him obediently and didn't run around. But gradually he began to panic. Kevin lost weight at a speed visible to the naked eye. He spent the whole day lying on the bed that bound him. He never ate breakfast and lunch, and he had to force himself to eat dinner mechanically. He thought Kevin was threatening him with a silent hunger strike, but he found that no matter how he treated him, he would never say a word to him, nor would he react to his body's feelings. Jason panicked. He untied the restraints on Kevin and placed the key to the front door next to his pillow, hoping that he would go out for a walk, even if he would not come back on his own initiative. But no, Kevin's body was trapped on the bed, and his soul had long since dissipated. Jason called Kevin's father and Kevin's mother and put the phone numbers next to Kevin's ears. No matter how his mother cried and called his name and apologized to him, there was no response. I shut myself off from the world. Jason gave up the opportunity for promotion and took me out every day to look at the mountains and peaks, and the sea and sky, hoping that the scenery he originally liked could arouse my interest in life. But he discovered to his dismay that I hated going out. Because of that car, I refuse any enclosed means of transportation. Jason took me to see a psychiatrist and invited numerous private doctors to my home. Even though I knew I had mental problems, I refused treatment and the doctors were helpless. The medicines they prescribed only made me mentally depressed and sleepy, but did not solve the core problem at all. If I can't untie the knot in my heart, I'll never be able to get out of it. Jason kept asking his superiors if there was any special way for a beta to enter the military camp, but the answer was that there was no channel except the public election every 5 years. This is the cruelty of this world class. An ordinary beta will not receive any preferential treatment, even if their family is high-ranking. Jason didn't dare let me go home. He took me home once before. After stepping into that place, I walked around numbly, went to the kitchen, and looked at the knife with a metallic luster. Jason thought it worked. He was discussing with Kevin's father in the living room about letting me move back home, when he heard Kevin's mother shouting in panic. I took a knife in the kitchen and cut my wrists. From the moment I was sold, this was no longer my home. Just when Jason was getting extremely worried, a military doctor finally offered some useful advice. Jason walked into the bedroom carefully with a pile of books in his arms and placed them next to me as I stared blankly. This is a textbook for military district commanders. I heard that the internal commander selection will be held in 5 months. Those who pass can enter the military district. I don't know if you want to go, so I brought the book back, Jason said, and was surprised to find that my eyes moved. So he struck while the iron was hot and said, anyone can participate in this selection, and after passing the training, they can directly participate in the military's dispatch. I know that you really want to join the military, brother. I brought your ID card and the necessary materials. If you want to participate, please write your information on this registration form. I have prepared past exam questions and some internal materials in the study room. You can study in the study room. I won't go in and disturb you. Turns out that this method works. When Jason came back from buying groceries the next morning, I ate a little breakfast on the table and read a book in the study. Jason looked at the food on the table, which had only been eaten a few bites. He lay down on the table with a sense of relief and cried loudly. If he knew Kevin would become what he is now, he would never agree to that ridiculous treaty. 09. My appetite gradually returned to normal, and I could sit at the same table with Jason and eat calmly. Jason watched the patient's condition improve day by day and decided to strike while the iron was hot. He continued to listen to the doctor's advice and brought a puppy home. Sure enough, when I looked at the ignorant young puppy and reached out my hand to tease it, the puppy stuck out its soft tongue, wagged its tail happily and licked my palm, which made a smile appear on my face. Jason approached cautiously, seeing that I was in a good mood, and asked tentatively, "Do you want to give it a name?" My face suddenly turned cold, and I watched Jason cover his mouth and back away like a child who had made a mistake. I held the puppy in my arms, lowered my eyes and thought, my long hair covering my eyes. After a long time, just as Jason began to clumsily clean up the dog food and toys on the table, a hoarse and unpleasant voice was heard. "White. I haven't spoken for 4 months, and I feel that my own pronunciation is very obscure. It's not that I don't want to speak, but I just feel that there is nothing in this world worth speaking. I originally thought that the stories of Omegas who were forced to be sent away for the sake of their families would not happen to me. I have a taciturn father and a doting mother, and I thought I had a happy family. But it turned out to be wishful thinking. I held White in my arms and gently rubbed its head, hoping that if I couldn't be perfect, White could be perfect. Jason stood in front of me, still holding the toy in his hand, tears flowing uncontrollably. Thinking of the doctor's advice, Jason suppressed his inner throbbing, reached out to wipe the tears from his face, and said in a trembling voice, "Okay, let's call you White." With a good start, my condition improved day by day. I would practice pronunciation every day as recommended by the doctor, and no longer resisted the doctor's prescription for treatment. What surprised Jason was that I would walk up to him with the materials and ask if he could find a teacher for me, as there were some things I didn't understand. But human desires are endless. Seeing that I was willing to pay attention to him, Jason became more and more demanding, hoping that I would not be so cautious in getting along with him and go back to the time when I affectionately called him Jason. So after seeing the teacher off, Jason gently knocked on the study door. I opened the door, looked at Jason, who was at a loss, and turned sideways to let him in. Jason looked at the neatly arranged books on the table, picked up a book and looked at the densely packed notes on it, in a handwriting he was familiar with. The exam was less than a month away. Jason put down his books and sat opposite me. "Brother, how are you preparing?" I looked at him expressionlessly, and Jason spoke awkwardly. "I'm fine. Thank you." I speak a little slowly and my reactions are a little slow. Jason chatted for a while, and when he saw that I was no longer so defensive against him, he stood up, walked to my side, knelt on one knee, and begged in a soft voice, "Brother, can you please not be so polite to me like you used to be?" I looked down at Jason without saying anything, as if he was thinking about something. After a long while, I opened my mouth and said slowly, "I am your adopted child, so I don't have the right to be like before." That simple sentence shattered Jason's disguise of calmness. He lay on my lap with trembling lips, and his tears wet his soft home pants. "I'm sorry. I didn't expect it to turn out like this." I looked at Jason crying and didn't understand what he was sad about. Anyway, I was the canary kept in Jason's house, and all I had to do was obey him. So I didn't reach out to comfort Jason, but just sat there blankly until the sun set. 10. Jason hasn't been at home recently. I don't know where he went and I didn't ask him. I just sat in the study room, doing one set of questions after another and listening to the teacher's lectures. 5 days before the exam, Jason staggered back with a piece of red paper in his hand. The moment he saw me, Jason finally couldn't hold back and threw himself into my arms, unable to conceal the fatigue in his voice. "Brother, let's get married." I looked at the marriage application form stuffed in my hand, and I was confused. With Jason's family background, he should find a family of equal status to marry into. Why did he want to marry someone like me whose family is declining? Confused in my heart, I asked the question. Jason didn't answer, but just hugged the warm person in his arms tightly. In fact, his family did oppose his proposal to marry me. With Jason's current status, he should marry an Omega who can benefit the family and produce offspring. Jason has been running back to his ancestral home every day for this matter, and he even received family training for it. In the end, Grandma Yi couldn't bear it anymore and agreed to the marriage. Jason went to discuss with Kevin's family. Kevin's father naturally agreed, but Kevin's mother became extremely mentally fragile after witnessing her son cutting his wrists, and she refused no matter what was said. Jason, who was always proud, knelt at the door of Kevin's family for 3 days and 2 nights, swearing again and again that he would be good to me forever, before Kevin's mother agreed. I didn't get an answer to my question, so I didn't ask any more. Looking at the books spread out on the desk, I thought if I didn't agree, I would probably be locked up here again and miss another exam. And whether I get married or am kept by someone, I can't leave here. I let it go, nodded and said, "Okay." Jason was stunned. He thought that I would be the hardest to agree to, but he didn't expect that he would agree so readily. I gently pushed him away, picked up a pen, signed my name on the marriage application form, handed it to Jason, then closed the door and continued studying. Jason looked at the upright handwriting on the paper and slapped himself hard to make sure he was not dreaming. Without stopping, Jason submitted the marriage application form the next day, and then took me to the hotel on his electric scooter. The 2 families sat at the same table. Jason's family felt relieved seeing how well-behaved and obedient I was. At the same time, they did not expect that their naughty and willful son could really win over this proud child who had been excellent since childhood. Kevin's mother sat next to me and kept picking up food for me. I thanked her politely and kept a distance from her. I didn't touch the dishes that my mother picked up for me, which I didn't like. When the show finally ended, I looked indifferently at the sad mother who was crying while pulling at her sleeves, and gently pulled out her clothes. "Mother, you should go back." Then I bowed and said goodbye to my parents, and then I followed Jason away. Things went smoothly afterwards. I passed the internal selection successfully and performed well in the subsequent training. The military made an exception and allowed me to participate in some small-scale battles for training. I received an ID card from the military on my 22nd birthday. On the same day, Jason's susceptible period arrived and I accepted Jason. With my indulgence, Jason slowly returned to his original arrogant self. And because of our outstanding performance on the battlefield, the top management designated us as partners. In this way, our relationship has gradually become what it is today over the past 6 years. 11. Jason seems to be in such a good mood today. Lieutenant General Jeffrey looked at Jason, who was humming a little tune and patrolling with his hands behind his back, and felt that the sun was rising from the west. Suddenly, there was a flash in front of his eyes, and he leaned in to take a closer look. Wow, it turned out to be the reflection of the ring on Jason's hand. Since when did the Admiral start to like wearing jewelry? Jason glanced at Jeffrey and proudly held out his hand in front of him. You are such a rough man. Do you know what a wedding ring is? Ah, it's a wedding ring. No, what wedding ring? Are you married, bro? Jeffrey was slow to react. His jaw dropped in shock. He looked at Jason's smug back and chased after him to gossip. I sat in the office, frowning as I read the secret report that came urgently from the front line, ignoring my colleagues who were lying outside the door and pointing at me. Kevin has a ring on his finger. No way, Kevin is actually married. I don't know which Omega is so lucky. Why don't I have this kind of luck? Hey, I'm telling you guys, don't tell anyone else. Jeffrey in our gossip group also posted a big gossip. Look, the man opened his phone mysteriously and clicked on a picture. Oh my God, this ring is a match with Kevin's. The style is exactly the same. Turn out to be. The group of people gathered at the door exclaimed quietly, and suddenly Jason stood behind them with a smile and said, What are you talking about? Jason, looking at Jeffrey who was winking behind Jason. He had already said in the group that he was going this way, but everyone was busy eating melons and no one paid attention to him. Now he was caught in the act. Everyone is very free. Just when they thought they were going to be scolded, I suddenly called out for Jason to come in. Watching Jason walk in, Jeffrey closed the door and rolled his eyes at his colleagues, who were secretly happy about surviving the disaster. Jason walked behind me and I was hugged while reading the secret report. It turned out that the rebellious Armored Corps technician went to the cave thieves and comprehensively updated and strengthened their equipment. Not only were they capable of both offense and defense, but they also had great destructive power and were now constantly attacking the defense line. What's more deadly is that they have an S-level Omega named Scott whose pheromone is comparable to that of a biological weapon, the poppy. Wherever the cave thieves go, the high-level generals composed of alphas cannot enter the battlefield at all, and the federal army is losing ground. In this situation, the front line can only request support from the federal central government, and due to the seriousness of the matter, my superiors decided to put me in charge of this battle. I explained the situation to Jason and decided to form an army of betas to rush to the front line. Jason gathered all the soldiers together, carefully selected the captains of each group, and selected outstanding beta soldiers in the army. I stood on the second floor and looked down at the huge crowd. I clenched my fists and finally let go weakly. 12. In fact, the battle situation was even worse than reported in the secret report. When Jason and I arrived, Scott had been given some kind of diffusion enhancement device, which caused his pheromones to spread over most of the battlefield, controlling the federal soldiers to kill each other. The reinforced armor is so strong that ordinary ray laser guns cannot damage it at all, and most of the technicians who control the core equipment are alphas and cannot participate in the scene at all. The worst part is that they would rather watch the federal border being eroded bit by bit than leak core technology to remotely command beta technicians to operate advanced equipment. After I arrived, I went directly to the command room to take over the original commander. I quickly and efficiently commanded the conscious soldiers on the battlefield to retreat back to the city, released inhibitors on a large scale to wake up the confused people on the battlefield, and let the supporting troops take over the battle. As for the core technical equipment, Jeffrey rushed over and kicked the technician who was leading the operation hard in the chest, and cursed him while he was out of breath. You only think about maintaining your illusory technician status. If something goes wrong, you cowards will be the first to be thrown onto the battlefield. After they were all arrested for crimes endangering federal security, confidential technical personnel dispatched by the Federation taught the technicians how to operate the equipment, and finally, with the intervention of advanced weapons, the situation was stabilized. We must send someone to kill Scott. Otherwise, the number of reinforcements will not be enough to stop those long-planned thieves. An emergency meeting was held in the command room. It was obvious that the attack by the tunnel thieves was long planned, organized, disciplined, and well organized, completely different from the previous harassment and petty fighting. Choose the most elite team from the group to carry out the assassination. I flipped through the list of beta leaders leading the team, jotted down their names and appearances, and handed the list to Jason. Jason will be in charge. The rest of the defense. After all, the cave robbers had not formed a complete, planned national organization, and the backup resources were insufficient. After finding their weak defense line, Jason commanded the army to launch a surprise attack, and it really had an immediate effect. The attack of the tunnel thieves slowed down significantly. Their men did not have enough food supplies, and they saw the Federation sending a large number of troops. The army was filled with panic, morale was broken, and there were signs of retreat. But there was still no progress on the front. All the generals who wanted to assassinate Scott were suppressed by the Alpha beside him. The two experienced generals who were sent escaped by chance, but a slightly younger major general failed to escape in time and was controlled by them. According to their description, Scott was protected by two guards whose fighting power was no less than Jason. Suddenly, the cave thief had a bargaining chip and demanded that the Federation hand over food supplies, otherwise he would be chopped up and left on the battlefield as a public example. In order to ensure the safety of the hostages, I discussed with others and decided to send some food, but added a small amount of fatigue powder. What everyone didn't expect was that during this period, the tunnel robbers did not sit still and wait for death, but instead sent people to secretly poison the drinking water in the city. Although I quickly ordered the water source to be closed and sent heavy troops to guard it, I didn't expect that the tunnel robbers' move was actually a feint to the east and attack in the west. On the front battlefield, the tunnel thieves launched an unexpected large-scale attack, and Scott's pheromones were mixed with oppressive alpha pheromones. This time, even Beta couldn't resist. The situation is serious. Jason rushed to the battlefield wearing one of the few core protective suits and rotated the soldiers to the battlefield. The current situation is completely maintained by core weapons. In recent days, the Federation has been working hard to develop protective clothing that can block induced pheromones. However, due to the high cost and scarcity of the materials used, there are only 10 pieces in the entire Federation, half of which were sent to the front line, and my master Eric was sent here. Jason is undoubtedly the most suitable person to assassinate Scott, but it is difficult to find a general while it is easy to get thousands of soldiers. No one dares to let Jason take this risk. I looked through the screen at the calm people on the battlefield and interrupted everyone's discussion. I'll go. Don't be ridiculous, Kevin. Eric looked at me seriously. The conference room was silent. Everyone looked at each other, wondering if I was serious. First, as a beta, I can resist the omega pheromones that have an oppressive effect on the alpha. Secondly, the people who could participate in this operation had already been dispatched, and the results are obvious. Third, I have undergone professional training and participated in assault-type projects. I think I can complete this operation. I am very organized, and my colleague who has worked with me for 6 years stared at me with wide eyes and couldn't tell that I had had such an experience. But you are also a beta and the oppression of the alpha. I have the mark of an S-rank alpha on my body. 13. Nonsense. You are the commander-in-chief of this war. How can you just step into the battlefield casually? If something happens to you, where will you put your soldiers and the people in this city? Eric slammed the table and stood up. Looking at my calm and determined expression, he asked everyone to go out first while he talked to me. Master, you know I've wanted to go there my whole life. Eric covered his head and looked at me. She had been teaching me since before my exam, so she naturally knew what I had been through. But you are too willful this time. You are the commander-in-chief. Are you going to leave them on the battlefield like a group of horses without a leader? I have applied to the central government. You are now the overall person in charge of this war. I pulled a document out of the folder and pushed it in front of Eric. You! Eric got so angry that he slapped me on the head. What have I taught you? In a war, as a commander, you can never take the initiative to propose changes. If the backbone is shaken, the army will be in chaos. Master! I raised my head calmly, looking at Eric without any emotion, which made her feel uneasy. "I don't want to live anymore." Eric opened his mouth but couldn't say anything. He could only watch me stand up, take off my commander's hat and put it on the table. It was because I knew that the central government would send a master that I felt relieved to hand over the job. "I studied with you and learned your strategic tactics, so I believe that you are more suitable for this position than me." "I'm sorry, Master, but I'm really tired." You want to go to the battlefield. I can go back and apply for you. I'll be your guarantor. Okay? This operation is too dangerous. Those are people of the same level as Jason. You can't go. You can only go if you—" I didn't expect to come back alive. I knew from Eric's expression that she would agree. This operation requires someone who is ready to die, and I am the most suitable person. Eric silently watched me take off everything that symbolized my identity, and he was right. I watched Eric finally pick up his commander's hat, sit in the main seat, and write the consent form. As I turned to walk out, Eric looked at his lonely back and felt very sad. "You never came out." This action is not only motivated by my own selfish motives, but also by hers. And she also believes that I will complete this task perfectly. 14. I put on the special federal protective suit, checked my weapons, looked at the closed combat cabin, took a deep breath, suppressed my inner panic, and walked in. Eric connected to the channel of my communication machine. "The smoke bomb will be launched when he reaches the edge of the cave thieves' camp. I must take advantage of these few minutes to destroy the Omega's glands. Otherwise, I will be trapped in the dilemma of being isolated and helpless." Clear. I adjusted the particle gun in my hand, stretched my muscles, grabbed the handle of the combat cabin, and leaned out to look down at the battlefield below where flames of war were lingering. The feeling of stepping into the battlefield makes my blood boil and my whole body is filled with strength. Eric looked through the screen at the man who was obviously excited and whose eyes were lighting up, and sighed that Kevin should be a general fighting recklessly on the battlefield. 3. I stepped on the edge of the fighting compartment and inserted the knife in my hand into my sleeve. 2. The tunnel robber signal detector below suddenly gave off a shrill alarm. 1. Move. I pushed hard with my right leg, and my whole body jumped out of the cabin and fell freely. As the smoke bomb exploded, red dots flashed on the light screen in front of me. I adjusted my posture, lowered my legs, and crossed my arms to let the buffer on my body take effect. The guard next to the Omega felt a creature approaching, picked up his gun, and continuously fired bullets into the air through the smoke. I dodged nimbly and landed stealthily behind them without making any sound. The interfering pheromones released by Scott were well blocked by the protective suit. I crawled towards the man little by little, close to the ground. Just when I was about to stand up at the right distance, Eric's voice suddenly rang out. "Roll 3 meters to the right. They've found you." I reacted quickly, and the next second a laser beam appeared on the ground. Without wasting any time, I quickly attached something under the command desk and ran towards Scott. 2 red dots on the light screen were flying towards me rapidly. I leaned over and slid past them. At the same time, I pulled out a particle gun from my waist, turned around and fired quickly. While the 2 of them were dodging, I quickly ran forward. When I saw Scott's face clearly, I didn't expect that he would have dull eyes, skinny cheeks, and a body covered with thorns. What era is this? There are still people who use this kind of torture method. Don't be stunned. Behind you. I was distracted for just a second, and the person behind me quickly caught up with me, pulled out a sharp knife and stabbed it into my heart. I failed to dodge in time and the knife stabbed me in the chest. Fortunately, I was protected by the protective clothing, and I only felt like my chest was hit hard by a heavy object, but there was no blood. Taking advantage of this opportunity, I jumped into the air and rushed towards Scott, but just as I grabbed his shoulders and ankles, I was dragged down. Eric was getting worried watching this in the command room. At the same time, Jason, who had somehow learned about my assassination attempt, hurried back to the command room. The front line was suddenly disrupted because of this incident. Scott suddenly stopped releasing the interfering pheromones, and the federal soldiers took advantage of the chaos within their ranks to counterattack. All this happened in just a few minutes, so when Jason entered the command room, The first thing he saw was me being grabbed by the ankle and hit hard. It's going to fail. Eric didn't dare to look any further but had to force himself to observe the situation around him so as to find a way for me to survive as soon as possible. I felt like my ankles were about to be crushed. I gritted my teeth and tore open the suppression patch on the back of my neck, releasing the pheromones that Jason had overdosed on me the night before, and fought against that man. Just as I was struggling hard, Scott, regardless of the pain of the thorns piercing his body, bent down and took the initiative to expose his gland to me. "Please help me get free." His throat was almost completely broken, and I struggled to make out what he was saying. My hands were faster than my brain, and with a flip of my wrist, the knife flew out of my hand. Just as I was thrown heavily to the ground, the knife pierced his gland, and the smell of poppy instantly overflowed, indiscriminately attacking everyone present. My forehead was badly broken and my eyes were stained with blood. I forced myself to stand up and pressed the switch of the bomb. The miniature bomb that he had attached to the tunnel thief's command platform. 15. "Kevin, run!" Jason pushed Eric away and shouted at me through the microphone. But my ankle had just been broken, and I dragged my body against a box, looking at Scott, who fell down with a peaceful smile, his head leaning back in relaxation. Jason looked at Kevin, who was smiling with relief despite being in trouble, and wished he could jump to his side and take him away. "It doesn't matter. I died 7 years ago anyway. Don't be sad, Jason." I clicked on the video call with the command room, and Jason hadn't seen me smile so happily in a long time. The burning sky in the distance is like a piece of stained glass placed in the sun. The flowing, brilliant colors hit my face, full of the colors of life, and it is about to spread its wings and fly high in the sky in the next second. This way, my trip to this world won't be in vain. The tunnel thieves in all directions were fleeing, and the federal soldiers took advantage of the situation to pursue them, beating them back step by step. I didn't want to say anything more to Jason. I whispered, "Thank you, Master," and hung up the video without any reluctance. At the same time, the equipment monitoring my vital signs was removed. I lay on the ground, watching Scott reach out to me, and I reached out and held his hand, as he was also freed. Jason couldn't hear the explosion, and he turned and ran out the moment I ended the video. When he arrived at the command platform, the bomb that was supposed to be detonated was canceled remotely by Eric. But there was no sign of Scott and I. He searched the battlefield but couldn't find the familiar figure. After returning to the Federation, Jason, on behalf of Jason's family, together with Kevin's family and other aristocratic families, wrote a letter requesting the abolition of the distinction between internal election and public election and the equal treatment of people of the three castes. Jason was guarding an empty house, feeling regretful from time to time. If he had not done those things and had not stopped Kevin from running for election, would their ending today be different? Kevin was so quiet and peaceful during these 6 years that Jason almost forgot the pain he was going through. He held the simple silver ring tightly against his heart, praying to God to let him meet his brother again. Jason traveled all over the country, looking for that familiar figure. I walked along the beach, looking at the familiar houses and the mountains in the distance. Scott, who was also relieved and felt that we had met too late, smiled at each other. I have been dealing with the world for a long time, but in the end, all I have gained are the fresh breeze on the river and the bright moon in the mountains. Looking at the figure running towards me in the distance, the sun is shining brightly, and I have escaped from suffering and towards freedom.